journey beyond imposter syndrome. This is where I invite you into a space where high achievers and spiritual leaders converge to redefine success and self-worth. By sharing transformative stories and engaging with thought leaders, this podcast serves as a roadmap for navigating the complexities of imposter syndrome. It's an intimate look into overcoming personal barriers tailored for those who value wisdom, leadership, and intuition in business and life. Join me at the Humble Warrior Podcast with Alani Bankhead. Welcome to the Humble Warrior Podcast. My name is Alani Bankhead, and I'm super excited today to have Micah Hoffman on. He is someone who is super dedicated to helping people grow their skills and achieve success. I have known Micah via LinkedIn for a hot minute, and he is the co-owner and OSINT expert at his company, MyOSINT Training. And he's also the Deputy Chief of Investigations at the National Child Protection Task Force. So thank you so much for coming today, Micah. Please tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your story?
Lonnie, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. So, in a nutshell, and feel free to ask me to do more or whatever, but in a nutshell, my career has taken me through many different twists and turns over the years, and most recently cybersecurity and into the OSINT world, or open source intelligence world. And one of the things I didn't realize could ever happen was I was smack in the middle of my cybersecurity career, leading a team of people, doing some really good work. And I started looking around me at all the people that were doing open source and doing cybersecurity, sorry. And I started seeing how they were doing, like, finding new vulnerabilities and writing tools to exploit things. And I thought, I'm not doing any of those things. The reality was I had a really good time, really good life, great team, great job, but I kept comparing myself to others so much that I wasn't able to see what the good I was doing. And that's the first time I learned about imposter feelings.
Oh my goodness. And I can't wait to talk to you more about imposter feelings. But first, for the audience members who aren't familiar with some of the jargon, can you please explain what open source intelligence is?
Absolutely. In a nutshell, open source intelligence is mostly nowadays going online onto the internet and finding out information to help answer some sort of question. So whether it is maybe somebody's going to investigate a business for wrongdoing or scams or fraud, and they need to look up who owns the business, where's it located, and other information. Or maybe they're looking for a person, and a person that is missing, or a person that is applying for a job or something like that. And they research that person, and then they create some kind of report that discusses what they've discovered, and then they present that to somebody that takes some action. So open source intelligence, finding stuff mostly online right now.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for explaining that. So my first experience with Micah and crew was actually when I was working child exploitation cases in Hawaii. And I have to give you guys a quick shout out because when I first interacted with y'all, I got a link to a training that National Child Protection Task Force was doing years ago from a peripheral contact who said, hey, our organization, our cyber experts are having a meeting with these guys. I'm part of that organization on a temporary basis. And so they were like, we think this would be great. So I go and I'm listening to everything that National Child Protection Task Force is all about, which in a nutshell, you guys help law enforcement and justice systems find missing kids and seek justice in trafficking and child exploitation cases. Super incredible team. And I had 3 meetings with you guys where I was like, but what's in it for them? You guys were always like, yeah, we're here to help you. Like, these are all the resources we have available. And I'm like, okay, cool, but you have to be getting something out of this. And then finally, it clicked. There was something that you guys had said where I was like, oh my gosh, these are actually selfless people. Like, where have you been my whole life? And during that operation, so we partnered with NCPTF. There were about 11 law enforcement agencies that we got together, and we were able to recover more than 10 missing minors during the course of that. And NCPTF was a really big part in a couple of those recoveries, especially like critical to us finding those kids. So if you're a justice system professional and you're looking for an amazing organization to partner with, Micah and the NCPTF crew are just like out of control. And I'm going to actually link the press release that we did, thanking you guys for the work, because it was truly like a breath of fresh air to work with people who weren't selfishly motivated. But with that being said, we're here to talk about imposter phenomenon or imposter syndrome. And how about we start by just talking through, what does imposter phenomenon look like for you? When did it first show up? Like, what's your story with that?
Yeah. So, like I said earlier, it showed up probably around 2012 or so, and it was just this realization that all of the contributions that I had made to cybersecurity, information security were really not that much and didn't amount to anything, weren't helping anybody. I'm a big person that likes helping other people, like you mentioned with NCPTFs. The fact that these contributions were just being were probably not even being used, and just that negative self-talk happened over and over and over again until it came to a head at a conference where I was listening to some of the main people in cybersecurity that I really looked up to, more experienced people, and I realized that I was comparing myself to people that had, 5, 10, 15 years more experience, more education in the field than I did. And I felt it highly inadequate. And to the point that I actually went back to my home after the conference, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to look for a new job. This cybersecurity thing's not working out. And I started looking for jobs outside of cyber, just going to end my whole career based upon those strong feelings.
Oh my gosh, you were going to blow it all up.
Yeah.
So, was it immediately after the conference that you did that, or was it a process? Was it like percolating and then a year or two later? What was the time
Mhm.
frame for you?
No, it was pretty immediate. In fact, I remember at the conference, I didn't stay at the conference hotel. I had to walk a couple blocks, I would say, to the hotel, and I can remember having taking that three block and thinking, gosh, this is really it. There's no reason for me to be here. It was a great time, but I think it's time for me to go and find what I'm meant to do, find where I can actually contribute, because I'm not doing all the things they're doing.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's interesting that you were asking yourself, like, okay, now it's time for me to find what I was meant to do. So, on some level, it sounds, whether right, wrong, indifferent, true or not, there was a part of you that left that conference and you were of the belief that this wasn't what I was meant to do. Looking back, would you say that that was true? That was your body saying, no, this really isn't it, and we have to pivot? Or do you think that there was maybe some falsehood there?
No, absolutely
Okay.
falsehoods. Because as I've discovered in more recent years, cybersecurity was a big part of my identity. It was who I was. I would go to work and do cyber, and then I'd come home and I'd do my open source projects where I would make a tool or something and release it for free on the internet, hoping that people would like it, or I'd do some research. I was doing that for hours afterwards. So a good 12 to 16 hours of every day was spent doing these things. And then I had this odd feeling like, nah, I don't belong here. Nah, I'm not
Mm.
doing that. So I'm inadequate, and I might as well just go. So
Yeah. Okay. So I don't belong here was the key statement
yeah,
that it was telling
definitely.
you. And the reason why you didn't belong there was because you were not qualified in terms of the education and the experience that you thought you needed to belong there.
I think it was looking back, it didn't have to do with the education experience. It had more to do with I'm not doing flashy, cool, interesting things that I can make into talks and give in front of hundreds of people.
Mhm.
And more recently, I've discovered that I highly value being a teacher. I am a teacher with owning MyOSINT Training and doing some other things. And so looking back at that time through that lens of really I was trying to tell myself, hey, you need to start teaching. You need to start explaining some of the things that you do know. But I just wasn't ready to hear that at that point. So I was like, well, this cyber thing's not working. I'm not doing that. So I might as well leave.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So this is really interesting because you are known in the community as a teacher. You do tons of talks all over the world
Yeah.
on OSINT, and you help build capacity amongst justice system professionals to be able to do the work. Because as you and I know, the field is actually pretty small. There are a ton of people who say they want to do it. You might see a lot of it on TV or in movies or
Right.
whatever it might be. But the reality is that the work is very, very difficult. And so it's hard to stick around the space because it can be pretty soul crushing sometimes. And so I'm super curious, like as a teacher, what is the main message that you convey to people who listen to your talks or do your training events?
I think the main messages are accessibility, that as a teacher, as an instructor, as an author, my main goal is to make sure that somebody can receive the information that I'm trying to convey, whether it's a new technique to find a missing child or whether it's something else to do whatever. If I can break it down and present it so that it's accessible to whatever student, whatever person's listening, then I've achieved my goal. Also, I think it's one of motivation. It's one of I don't want to say inspiration, but it is that I find wonder in the job that I do. Cybersecurity, there was always something more to learn. There was always something new to figure out, to uncover. Open source intelligence, same thing. It's it's the deeper, the more you can do, the more you can do, the better you can be at your job. And there's always something to strive for. So I think it's that motivating people to move beyond just yeah, I know how to do this one cool trick, and look for deeper things that are fun.
I love the way that you talk about the work that you do as a teacher. So it sounds like one of your identifiers of success is if I have walked away and someone has accessibility and the ability to make their work a little bit better, or they have a new innovative way of helping to protect the vulnerable, that is a win for me.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty much accurate. Yeah.
Okay. And then the other thing I'm hearing too is some of the language that you're using. So, like the wonder in the job, right? Which I absolutely love because normally in the justice space, and whether it's law enforcement or military or prosecutor or whatever, everybody's under resourced, certainly not enough time. The number of cases is going up. Everybody's a little bit in survival mode to a certain degree. So, to be able to introduce language, I'm not just surviving in this space. I'm thriving because I wouldn't associate the word wonder being in survival mode. So it sounds
Sure.
like you're really in a flow state in terms of you figured out for yourself what success looks like day to day. What other markers for success do you have at this point now? So when you, and this is professional or personal, like when you're looking back on your life and it's been insanely successful and you're just super grateful for all the connections you made, what are the things that you're happiest or proudest of having done?
That's a challenging question. Over the years, I've received feedback from people that have viewed something that I've made, and the fact that they found value in it has been incredibly rewarding. I'll give you some examples. That I helped create a project called the OSINT Curious Project, which lasted for several years and then disbanded. And during that time, I had done hundreds of hours of live streams where I taught just anybody that was online and recorded YouTube videos just showing open source intelligence skills or playing the geoguessr.com game. And what I found is that I would do that, and maybe there'd be 15 people that were on with me doing that live stream, not a huge audience at all, but there would be people that would watch that recording months or years later and say, I picked up this one thing that you did that I wasn't doing, or I used this one tool, and that helped me break this case open, do my job better, or help me sell something better on eBay. So it's nice to hear that feedback.
Yeah. So hearing from other people how you impacted their lives, that's a measure of success for you. Okay. Now, when we go back to the Micah who was at that conference in 2012, and if we told him success for you is getting feedback from somebody that you impacted their life or career in some way, what would he have said?
Hmm. I don't know if he, I don't know if he would have understood that or accepted that,
Oh,
because that Micah was a little different than the Micah that sits before you here. He looked at the world quite differently over so since 2012, I did a whole bunch of more different types of work, teaching students that were around, literally around the world, and in different cultures, with different motivations, with different companies, with different missions. And I think that diversity of experience and that diversity of true diversity of culture helps me understand that. Whereas that old Micah, he was focused very narrowly on the things that he knew.
yes. Okay. That is super interesting. So you really had to get out of your bubble to experience different perspectives for you to, it sounds like self-reflect and decide, ooh, I really like this element, or when I'm around these groups, or when I'm teaching these materials, I maybe feel a certain way. And that's the kind of the thing I want to keep chasing.
Hmm.
So when it comes to 2012, Micah, how would he have defined success?
I think it was doing more things in the public eye. It was capturing that audience, getting the wow factor on some talk, and really emulating the people that he looked up to.
So you sitting in the audience watching these people who are quote unquote more expert than you were like, wow, they're such a big name. And of surely you're getting great information from these folks, but the wow factor, like what was it about the wow factor? Like what would need to happen for someone to communicate to you, wow, they're on stage? What did that look like?
I think it's that feeling when you leave a talk, if you've ever been to a conference and you leave the talk, you're like, that was a that was a great presenter, and that content was not new to me, but it helped me become a better version of me.
Okay. So it sounds like on some level, great presenter and growth equals wow factor.
I
Okay.
think so.
Yeah. That's so funny because I think people would definitely use those terms to describe your teaching style for sure. You're super engaging.
Yes.
And I know it's very hard for very humble folks to receive. That's probably some of the hardest work that we'll ever do. But you are incredibly engaging in your talks and very charismatic. And it's very easy to connect with you and walk away with at least one thing, right? That, okay, I'm going to apply that to my life. And that's something that I'm working towards. So at what point do you think you had absorbed that wow factor yourself and been able to start doing that on stages yourself?
So I can't remember so I would say around 27. No, it had to be before 2017. I started teaching for an organization that required that wow factor. The courses that we taught, you had to have that technical depth, but you also had to have that edutainment where it was part education, part entertainment, and you had to have the stories and the personality and the energy. And I think that teaching for them really helped me move into that area and bring that to my teaching and to my talk. So
Yeah.
I would say probably probably 2 to 3 years after that 2012 Micah.
Okay. So around 2015, we'll say,
Sure.
man, 3-year process. You moved into this position. And out of curiosity, how was your imposter syndrome then as you were getting accepted into this role to be this educator and they're putting these requirements on the edutainment side? So how was the inner imposter at that point?
Think it came in cycles, right? The feelings came in cycles because there would be times when I would be teaching the exact same class to a different audience in a different town. And so teaching that exact same class over and over and over again was super it was comfortable. It gave me those feelings of, I know what I'm doing. This is not a new situation. You're going to do the exact same thing, and and you're going to give this joke at that time, and the class is going to laugh. And if they don't laugh, then you do this. You've got this. And so I had that extreme sense of comfort, and my inner imposter went away or was suppressed for a while. And then I started doing new things. I started being asked to speak at conferences, not do that training, but to come up with new material or explain something that I had created or researched. And in those new situations, that inner imposter just grew and grew and grew.
Oh, so it actually grew. It's not like it stayed the same, but every time you were presented with a different challenge, it grew and got louder. Or what did that feel like for you?
So for me, I would say that it increased in size and then decreased. So leading up to the event, I'm not good enough. Why am I doing this? Why have I done this for myself? They're going to know everything that I've done. And so that inner imposter and that negative feedback just it allowed that imposter to get big. And then after the event, when I got that, hey, that was a really engaging talk, that was very entertaining, and I took away things from it, hitting all those marks, that imposter would shrink, just go back down, just hide. And I'd be like, phew, got through that. And then back to teaching, feeling good. And then a new novel situation comes up, and there that imposter comes back.
Yeah. So it sounds like anytime you were stretched as a teacher, the inner imposter would come up.
Yeah,
And I'm really big into getting into kind of the nitty-gritty, like the details of it, because it always drives me a little bit nuts when people are just like, and then I struggled with it, and then I overcame it. And that struggled with it. So those three words are so loaded because there's so much in there,
sure.
right? What does your inner imposter feel like when it's loud in those novel situations? Is it like a pit in your stomach? Is it like your intuition or something in your head that's talking to you? What is that sensation for you?
Yeah, it's that negative self-talk. It's that having that conversation with my head. For instance, if I go to a conference and I'm feeling out of place, or I'm feeling like if I'm going to a conference and I'm speaking, going as an attendee, not a problem. But going as and speaking and listening to some of the other speakers, it 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 helps to reinforce the fact that, hey, my talk is not like their talks. I'm the one that has the bad talk, or I'm the one that there doesn't have to be a good talk and bad talk, but this is what I hear in my head is like, you're missing the mark. You're not going to connect with the audience. This is going to be a talk that is not looked upon well. Nobody's going to learn anything. All these people know this. And it just gets louder and louder and louder like that.
Yeah. So the negative self-talk, is it, and again, to get specific, because I think the inner imposter shows up differently for different folks. And for people who are trying to figure out what their imposter syndrome might feel like, these conversations can help maybe jog something that the awareness to go from a subconscious state to a more of a conscious state. And so when you say negative self-talk, is it like a menacing, like kind of voice that's doing the self-talk, or is it just like a nagging thing, or do you have physical sensations? Some people have clammy hands, or they can feel their heart rate increasing during that negative self-talk. What kind of physical or other characteristics can you
Yeah,
attribute?
for me, I don't have any of the physical manifestations like the sweaty palms or anything like that. It's more my voice in my head, saying these things like, hey, you know what? You didn't do this, or that it should be a little different, or oh, you know what? You forgot to put this in your slide, or I see that on their slide. You should put that. So that feeling of inadequacy, and I have to do better. I have to make it even more perfect.
Oh, that's so interesting because I've heard it characterized in so many different ways. I've never heard someone say it's actually my voice, which
Yeah.
is super, super interesting. And that definitely helps me see how extra scary it would be then, because it's not like something kind of like the devil on one shoulder and an angel on another shoulder. It's nothing like that
Right.
where you think it's you. And so to have you sharing those messages with yourself would be super terrifying. And so how do you interact with your inner imposter now?
So I think that the hardest part for me was that it was me talking to me. After I spoke to you last week about some stuff, I started to reframe those conversations with myself. And if I can share a little bit of what you essentially said, hey, make it somebody else's voice. And so I'm a big Princess Bride fan, so I like Vizzini. So that voice, that negative self-talk voice, no longer comes through as Micah with all the meaning and experience and life story that it does. It comes through as a little small tiny man that is insignificant and doesn't know what the word inconceivable is.
Yeah.
So physically now, and I literally was talking to my wife about this, physically now, the words that are being said to me are a little bit more ludicrous because it's, oh, this little guy inside my head, he's talking to me, but it's not me saying that with all the extra connotations of you've given hundreds or not, if not, hundreds and hundreds of talks, you've live streamed, you've done all these things, and you're not adequate enough versus Vizzini saying that. So it's
Oh my
much
gosh.
easier to deal with.
That is hilarious. Thank you so much for sharing because I can hear Vizzini's voice.
Yeah.
By the way, people, if you have not watched The Princess Bride, I might link it in the show notes because you have to go watch it. It's a classic. And yeah, that voice of that short, like itty bitty man and his lisp and just how funny he is and ultimately harmless. Yeah. And
Exactly.
so it's interesting that you're talking about one of the tools, which is to create separation between you and the inner imposter. And that is a really simple way. And thank you so much for sharing your experience and being aware that my inner imposter is still there, but it's not maybe as powerful as I thought it was at one point because now I can laugh at it.
Yeah, you giving me the suggestion to give it its own voice allowed me to give it a less powerful voice in my head and to style it however I want. So now instead of it being me saying I'm not experienced enough, I don't have all these things, they're not going to like me. Now it's just some external, and it's internal, but somebody else saying, hey, even though you've given lots of talks, this one's not going to be great. And
Yeah.
so I can now value those statements differently than if I was saying them to myself, which
Yeah.
was incredibly valuable for me.
Oh, wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that. And thank you for sharing that with our audience. So you guys can try that at home. Creating a separate persona for your inner imposter helps you create separation between you and it. And so now we have this very practical example from Micah on how he's benefited from that tiny change. So out of curiosity, I want to pivot a little bit to, we've talked about how scary imposter syndrome is, how stressful it can be. But are there any ways that you've benefited from your imposter syndrome?
I would say yes, because the inner imposter in me always strove to make things more perfect, more accessible, more better takeaways. And so I feel like it did have a positive influence on how I present, how I convey information, thinking about all the different modalities that people learn in, the every making a presentation, as many of my colleagues and peers will attest, making a presentation that somebody gives with me is extremely frustrating for them because I have all these little rules that my inner imposter has said, the font must be at least 32 point. You don't put anything in the bottom that you want people to know in the bottom third of the screen, because I want people even in the back to be able to see through over people's heads and get that, all of these rules, because to make even better presentations, even more accessible ones. So yeah, I think I definitely have gotten better. But of course, each one of these things has its own anxiety too, or own pressure that comes with it. Yeah, I'd like to get better at presenting without the stress.
Yeah, no, I love that. But there's that theme of accessibility again.
Yeah.
So if I had to guess, based on what you're saying, accessibility is one of your top core values as a person. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to make my work, whatever that is, accessible to literally anybody who wants it.
Right.
who wants to benefit and sharpen their skills. So I'm going to shorten your timeline of learning because I'm really good at what I do and we need more people in the fight. So
Yeah.
if I can help you get the information and get it as easily as possible, that's success for me.
Yes. I'd say
Oh,
that's right on. Yeah.
I love that. And so, in terms of your perfectionism, okay, great. It helped you be the very best. There is something to be said about excellence. If I had to guess, excellence is probably another one of your core values. But what I'm hearing you say is maybe you've pivoted away from perfectionism and more towards the grace of the excellent side of things, which rather than perfection demanding that it be 100% on time, on target, every time, maybe we're working towards bringing our very best, but also showing ourselves grace in the event we don't get it at 100%.
I sure would like to say you are absolutely on point, Alani, but I don't think I can for this one. I just striving for excellence is always important. I want the materials, I want my presentation of the content to be on point, to resonate with people. And I know inside that not everybody is going to receive that the same way, and that people are coming to, whether it's podcasts like this one or talks, with different perceptions on how to interpret whatever I say. And some people I just annoy with my voice and my timbre and stuff. It's yeah, Griffin and I, my colleague Griffin and I have a wonderful thing that we do when people give us negative feedback. We do what they do on some of the late night talk shows where we take it and then we read them out loud and just laugh.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. But anyway, so I don't strive for perfection, but I do constantly work towards making things the best that they can. If that's, and I guess that is working towards excellence. And to the point that, like the night before a presentation, I will still be tweaking things and moving things around and stuff if I can.
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that when it comes to the imposter journey, right? So obviously we're here to talk about what that looks like for you, and hopefully people can gain some nuggets on maybe whether it's awareness for them or whatever it might be. But I think with the inner imposter, the same theme runs across the board, which is it doesn't matter what discipline or field you're in, the perfectionism is an inherent behavior of the inner imposter. And because we want things perfect, we want it with a nice little bow on it and nice and neat, and I can put it in a box and I can articulate a process. I have a to-do list, whatever it might be. But the truth is that the journey of either overcoming your inner imposter or harnessing it is different for everybody, and it's inherently very messy.
I
So
absolutely agree.
yeah, so you acknowledging that, yes, Alani, I know the right answer, quote unquote, is yes, I'm striving for excellence. I have let all of my imposter tendencies go. Look at how evolved I am. The honesty in saying, I wish I could tell you that, yes, I show myself extreme grace. But the truth is, no, I'm still a perfectionist when it serves me. So, what is
Yeah.
the mechanism for you to decide, right? Because you're definitely way more at peace, it sounds like, with interacting with your inner imposter. And you've learned, okay, it helps me achieve, it helps me do things that I never thought were possible versus when it's unhelpful. Is there a mechanism that you use to discern when I want to use my inner imposter to benefit me and when it's time to maybe ignore it or bring the Vasily voice in to minimize it?
So it really is a skill that I would say probably just starting to get into the past 8 to 10 months. And an example of this is that some of the conferences that I've spoken at this year and will speak at this year are things that were put in place back in the fall of last year. So it takes 6 8 months sometimes for speaker to be reserved and then to actually have the event. And I can remember when writing up those talk titles and the talk synopses and, oh, I think in 6 8 months I will do these things. I don't know them now really well, but I bet I could teach myself them in 6 to 8 months. And I think in those cases, I absolutely am tapping on that little inner voice going, hey, in 6 to 8 months, I'm going to need you to help me to learn these to competency so I can teach them because I don't currently do that. And then there's other times when it's that, you know what, for this talk, for this audience, I think let's go with the normal stuff because it might be new to them, but very, I guess, safe is the word for me with my thoughts.
Yeah, no, I love that because what I'm actually hearing you say is you use and harness your inner imposter now when you want to grow as a professional. So if
Yep.
there's material that you're not super familiar with, that's so interesting. You, instead of being like, oh, I'm not going to talk about that because I'm not an expert, which is what a kind of like a more typical inner imposter would say, you're saying, I want to get to this new level. And then you like tap your imposter on the shoulder and you're like, you're going to hold me accountable and make sure
Yeah.
that I get there. So when it comes time in 6 to 8 months for that talk to happen, oh, yes, I'm going to be on point. So I love that as a way to harness that imposter to get you to where you want to be. That's fascinating. So now let's talk a little bit about maybe, I don't want to call it the opposite of the imposter state, but imposter syndrome and imposter phenomenon have a tendency to keep us in very low level emotional and energetic levels, right? So I'm a victim, I can't do anything, people feel stuck, they don't take action. And so the opposite of that is, we'll call it flow state. So where you're so aligned, you're feeling so good, you're doing your thing. So for you, it would be you're teaching some material and things just feel amazing. Like it's happening. It feels very easy for you. You're connecting with the audience. Can you think of a time when you experienced that and
Oh
share
yeah,
with us?
absolutely. So the imposter feelings, as I mentioned, I would say that they are precursor type of feelings to me. So before an event is happening, right on the build up to an event, and some of it is just plain anxiety. Hey, this is the first time I've presented this material to this audience or been in this location. So I think that the imposter feelings are biggest when I'm at my weakest, that I'm not in that safe and sound. I see your face. So they're biggest then. But once I get on that stage, once I get on in that Zoom and I start presenting the material that I have worked really hard on, that I do know very well, that I understand how I'm going to present it and where the ups and the transitions are, and all of those wonderful things that my imposter feelings have led me to not perfect, but to strive towards that excellence for. I am presenting, and I don't even feel that imposter if a joke or a punchline or a topic lands poorly, was not received as I would have as I would have thought. I just am presenting and I am just in that moment.
Yes. So before the event, for lack of a better term, you're like, oh my gosh, I want to throw up. At least that's what I think. I'm just
Okay.
like, oh my gosh, I can't do this right. But your inner imposter is telling you all the things that you haven't perfected or that inner critic is there. And you said it's your biggest when you feel weakest, which of course you saw me get expressive because that's my core message, which is the thing you think is your weakness is the key to unlocking your greatest power. And so now, when we talk about weakest, people like us, right, the heart-centered world changers, we want to make the impact. And so weakness is something we don't particularly enjoy experiencing because you do have to present a certain element of strength, especially when you're a leader or a teacher in this space. So my first question is, how do you pick yourself up when you're in that point of maximum weakness? Like, how do you get past that to get on stage?
So I think there's some things that are out of my control. For instance, I really dislike when I have to turn in my materials that I'm going to be presenting before the talk. Why? Because I have to be okay with whatever I turn in, even though I might internally want to make it better and change some things. But that deadline for the conference that says, hey, you have to turn this in a week before, a month before, 6 months before you actually talk, that is both a relief and a pressure for me. There's other things that I can physically do. For instance, some of those things that make me a little bit weaker are not sleeping well, being in a foreign location, and food problems. Gosh, I can't tell you how many times had some food that didn't agree with me, and then you have to get on stage, and that is outside of our control. And I think that just brings me back down to earth. Hey, this can happen. Let's just get her done.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're talking about self-care,
Yeah.
which I love this topic because typically someone who struggles a lot with imposter syndrome will burn themselves out. That's another big behavior because your inner perfectionist is constantly demanding more and more work. I know for me, I came last all the time, whether it was my fitness, sleep, and in the fields or some of the units that I was in, that was a badge of honor of, oh, I was in the office 12 hours yesterday,
Right.
or
3 ulcers right now, and you've only
yeah,
got two. Yeah.
and oh, I only got 2 hours of sleep last night, or whatever it might be. So, what part does self-care play in helping you optimize that life of thriving that you want?
It's a different perspective, I would say. During the pandemic, like many people, I found out that I really didn't have any hobbies. I was cybering or OSINTing all the time during work, after work. My colleagues, my friends, it was all cyber, 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 or OSINT, OSINT, OSINT. And so when it came time that things shut down, or I was more remote, and I was like, I should do my hobby things. And I'm like, what are my hobby things? I actually had to think really hard for a while. And what I found out is that to keep myself to keep myself grounded, I like to start something that I don't know, and I just go ahead and start doing it. For instance, years ago I got a bass guitar. And so I was always told, for decades I was told, you're not a musical person, you can't play an instrument. I'm like, I think I'm at the time in my life when I can try. If I fail, I fail, but let me try. And at that point, it was interesting because my inner imposter didn't say, "Oh, you shouldn't even try." They're like, "Psh, you don't know anything about guitar, so yeah, if you fail, you fail." So it was not even in that area, that my imposter feelings were just totally absent in these areas where I knew I had no skill in. And so it's been very refreshing to make that time for myself. And I do. I hate to hear some of my colleagues who are like, I work 14 hours a day and I was up till midnight again last night or whatever for the fifth time this week. And I think to myself, that's not good. And you need to diversify in spending time with your family, or picking up a hobby or doing something else that can give you that off hours, that downtime, and maybe ones where my imposter syndrome doesn't impact me.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So first it cracks me up that you're like, oh, I realized I have no hobbies because my family, my husband and I have been in a very similar boat where even as early as 10 years ago, being in the military, you have mandatory vacation days if you go over a certain number of days that you have banked. And so they would make you take these days. And I remember on a Tuesday at 2 p.m. being out in a local market and looking around, and I'm like, who are you people that you're hanging out on a
Mhm.
Tuesday in the middle of
Yep.
the day, having a glass of wine with your friend? What do you do for a living? And same thing with hobbies. My husband retired from active duty, and we were like, okay, time to switch and not be such workaholics. And but what do we do for hobbies? Like, how do you do this? How do you find a hobby? Just
Yeah.
these really,
Just simple things like that. You're like, yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've seen these things online where people are like, oh, look, a younger person is having to Google how to tie a necktie. And I'm thinking, I have to Google like how to find a hobby that I like. What's the thought process behind choosing something non-work related? And I think that's a really big thing for me is it can't be work associated, right? Like I can't be like doing open source intelligence or Python programming to make a tool to make this better. It has to be not related, and maybe even not exercising the same mental muscles as what I do for my day job. Otherwise, it's not different. It's just more of work.
wow, this is super interesting because most of my clients can't compartmentalize their imposter syndrome that way. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost sounds like for your hobby, you described your imposter not even being there because you're like, whatever, it's telling you, Vasili's telling you, whatever, man, have fun. Because if you fail, like it doesn't matter. So, is the thought process with the hobby, because this is not professionally driven, there is no expectation or demand that I be successful? Or what is your why behind the hobby then?
So the why behind the hobby, just at its very basic, is to give me like something outside of work. But I do think that there has that component, or that there is that component of that experience, that expectation, that inner expectation of, you've been doing this for a while, but you stand up in front of audiences, I expect myself to be that perfection or that whatever. And for a while I did some mixed martial arts very, very poorly. And I was getting my ass beat. I don't know if I can say that on your podcast, but
Oh, yeah,
I
you can.
I was getting my ass handed to me by younger people, lighter weight people, more experienced people all the time. And I just got up off the mat and said, thank you, let's do that again. And that was refreshing because I almost expected not to be good at it. And I wasn't. So that kind of stuff, the imposter feelings don't come into play because I don't expect to be, I guess I'm not expecting to be that expert and not expecting other people to look at me and go, he knows.
Oh, interesting. So let me make sure that I'm reading between the lines correctly, because I think what I'm sensing is you're a teacher at heart. And so when it comes to teaching things, you expect yourself to operate at the very highest levels. But when you remove that defining element, so you're in your martial arts class or you're playing your instrument, you're not teaching anybody. So it's not aligned with your life purpose in terms of enriching or supporting life. And so because that expectation is no longer there, now you give yourself permission to just be.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. When I guess when I'm not expected to be on, to be not looked to for that expertise or for whatever, and I can just be the student or just be a passive, just a participant. There's no feelings there. The only feelings that may happen are the ones that say, hey, that person that is presenting, you should be doing that, or that should be you up on stage. That calling out that you should be there. That's why with my hobbies outside of my career, I do things that are absolutely unrelated to my work. Playing bass guitar or doing the martial arts absolutely is not something that I know I don't have expertise in. I know I don't have that experience that my sensei or that this teacher that I go to have. So there's no expectation internally that I should be doing that or that should be me. Yeah,
I love that.
it
Yeah,
it's more empowering to me. It feels normal for me to not even have that expectation in those situations, and that's why I like those hobbies.
yeah, for sure. No, this is such a wonderful tool to share with folks because you've created a different mechanism to not only silence your inner imposter so that you can decompress and self-care and fill that cup up so you can get ready for like
Yeah.
the future struggle of dealing with your imposter when you're getting on stage. But also it almost sounds like a form of meditation for you. So the martial arts, playing the music, because meditation comes up a lot as an element of self-care. And I know
Okay.
when I first started, I really struggled with it because my brain would go all over the place because brain's
Yes.
always overthinking.
Yes.
And I remember just being like, I suck at meditating and this is terrible. And then I realized at one point that somebody said they call it a meditation practice, not a meditation perfect. And like your brain is going to go in different directions. The point is not to do the meditation perfectly. The point is to be aware of, hey, my mind has wandered off to my to-do list. Now gently bring it back to the
Hmm.
activity. That's the success, is interacting with the overthinking a little bit differently and being more gentle. But meditation can look like yoga. It can look like people doing calligraphy, some like activity where you're able to be completely present. And it sounds like you get that in your music and in your physical activity through the
Yeah.
martial arts.
Absolutely. And for me, I'm one of those people that is annoyed by the tags on shirts or when the wind blows on my arm hair and I feel like there's a bug there. So I'm constantly like scratching or doing so trying to do meditation where I'm just laying there or sitting there, not doing anything. My not only does my mind wander, but all of those environmental things that touch my skin and my senses just drive me nuts. And so for years, I still don't consider myself good at meditation because it's just really challenging for me to do that. But like you just said, when I'm playing my bass, and I do not play my bass well, but when I play my bass and I just get into the groove of a song and I'm hitting the notes well, or maybe not just, but just in the moment, all of those things disappear. So yeah, it is a meditative state for me.
Yes, and it's flow state is what you
Yeah.
just
Yep.
described. Is you're grooving and you're jamming and you're being present in the moment. Okay, so favorite song to play to?
Right now, there's two. So I like songs that make me smile, which kind of sounds weird,
Oh.
but I like to play music that makes me feel good. So right now, A Thousand Miles by Vanessa Carlton.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. It's just got a nice easy rhythm and it's nice. And then there's one called The Great Escape, which I'm learning and I'm not good at. And that's
I'm trying to think of the band that sings that because it's like a rock, like a pop rock song,
it
right?
is. It
Yeah. Oh
is.
my gosh, I love that song. That's so
Yeah.
wild. So you're jamming out on your instrument to these songs just in flow state and you're in your happy place. So I love that because you couched it with this might sound silly, but
Boys Like Girls.
Boys Like Girls, that's what they're called. Yeah, that is
Yeah.
such a good song.
Yeah.
But the point is that what works for you is what works for you, and we don't need to apologize ever for whatever it is that gets us to that flow state. And I think that's a big element of the imposter phenomenon is what are other people going to think?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if these songs bring you joy, you have joy in this process, you're able to fully let go, embrace that flow state. And when you're done practicing or throwing people around the mat room or whatever it might be, now you're more energized and able to go in and do other life purpose, very important work of preparing people to protect their communities and be better investigators and all of those things.
Yeah. I think it's I think it took me a very long time from 2012 Micah to 2022 Micah, 2023 Micah to actually realize that that's what that music was. The music was the thing that allowed me to just breathe. It allowed me to just
Mhm.
be there and get to
Yeah.
that flow state. It took a lot of bumping into walls and just trying stuff and it not feeling good. It is kind of like when you go to a store and you shop for clothes, so many of them just don't feel right or don't look right or the tags bug you or they bug me. And then you find that whatever and you're like, this is me. And you get that and that feels good. It took me a long time to do that and to realize the reason why I needed that. That was really important.
Oh, I love that so much. And I love too that there's an element where you're just like, and I don't really care what anybody else thinks because that's what works for me. And that's a hard thing to overcome when you're constantly, your imposter is always feeding you information about what people expect from you and how you should be and stuff like that. So let's go to the place where we never want to go to. We don't even want to consider it, but failure. So can you think of a moment when you thought you had failed, but now with a little bit of time, you can look back and see that that failure was actually maybe paving the way to thriving or joy or success on your terms?
Oh, there are so many times in my life I've failed at jobs, failed in relationships, failed in learning. Oh yeah, I got fired from a contract. I got released from another job. And I think it's your perception on the event, what you learn out of it or don't learn out of it, and then what you do with that. And each one of those is a growth opportunity for me. And many of those growth opportunities, whether it was being released from a contract or fired from a job or getting my hours cut when I was working somewhere, going, you know what? This is an opportunity for me to do something new, to find something better. when I was working, I worked at a large company for about 10 years, and I got to the point where I knew I was not happy at the company anymore, but I didn't know what that next step was. And that next step was going to be very scary because it would be like becoming my own boss, which I never wanted to do. I know as a business person, I didn't want me as the person running the company, and there's so many areas of unknown, but you know what, I decided that this was very important, and I decided to move on. And I think in those cases, that inner imposter strove to help me be more successful and to make it work because I had to. As far as failures go, they're all throughout my life. My life is scattered with failures, but it is what I make of it. I think so. When my one of my kids was little, they went to a basketball team for like little kids, and I remember my child was not very good at sports, but was going to try. And so all the kids got around this coach from the very first day. And the coach said to these little 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old kids, listen, if you know how to dribble, cool. If you know how to shoot, great. But here on this court, I want this to be a safe place for you to fail, because when you fail, you grow. And I thought that's something I want to take with me all my life. Yeah, I fail a lot, but I also grow a
Mm,
lot.
yes. What I'm hearing you say is I'm either winning or I'm learning.
Ooh, yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. Failure still hurts. Failure still is disappointing. Failure still feels like a setback in the short term, but I think I told you earlier that, or at another time, that when I got out of college, I went to graduate school. And when I went to 2 years of graduate school, and then I was like, you know what? I want to become a doctor instead of a P. So I went back and took the 2 years of graduate school that I had and just threw them out the window because I had a dream now. And I went back and took biology, chemistry, physics, calculus for a whole year. And I learned all of the things. And then I applied to med school, and med schools were like, yeah, we don't really want you. And I was like, oh. And then I got some experience. And then the next year they didn't want me. And I could have taken that and just kept trying or whatever. I was like, you know what? This is an opportunity. This is the universe telling me, go find something else. And I did. And that's how I got into
Yeah.
computers.
Oh my gosh, that is so amazing. Okay, you mentioned the universe. I love this topic.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because we've spent all this time talking about the mechanics of your inner imposter, what success does or doesn't look like. And again, like the high achievers want like a nice little checklist of like, how do I get to success? How do I overcome my imposter syndrome, Alani? Send me the checklist.
Yep.
But you have experienced and shared elements of, you know what? I have to let go on some level. And I heard a client, we were first meeting and discussing what their process looks like. And when we talked about cycles, so everybody has a cycle on kind of what their inner imposter and what their success cycle looks like. And so when I asked them to identify in the past when you've struggled like this, where has the pivot happened? And they're like, I did everything I could and I tried to control. And then I was like, fuck it. And then magically everything fell into place. And so it's funny because this is not a conversation about religion, but it's about how do you define the undefinable? So something to me, those spiritual elements, it's just something that I know is true that I can't articulate with science or data. So when you talk about, hey, I think it was the universe pointing me to something else, how does that surrender element work for you? How do you harness that to create the life and career that you want?
I've found that the times I had that, fuck it, I'm just gonna go up there and be me, have been the most natural, honest presentations. Back in 2017, my imposter feelings were really getting a hold of me, and I decided, you know what? F it. I'm gonna go ahead and make a talk on imposter feelings. And my inner imposter is going to stand up on stage and talk to the people and tell them, give them that checklist of how they can go ahead and work through it. And so I don't feel the spirituality of it, but I do feel that the universe itself provides opportunities that we can recognize, we can embrace, we can reject. And some of us, it provides more opportunities or better opportunities. I feel very privileged to be where I am, to say, you know what, I quit my job and I went out on my own. That was not an easy thing to do for me, because but I had some help. So I think I've looked at my life as a whole bunch of paths, and every now and then I make a right turn or a left turn when I should have done the other thing, and I learn more about myself, and I learn more about who I'm supposed to be.
Yeah, that's so good. So are you talking about the web reacher talk that you did?
Yeah, the web reach one,
Yes.
right?
So we're gonna post that link in the show notes as well. You guys definitely need to check it out. He starts with this great conversation about Einstein, like the Albert Einstein, and how he felt like a fraud. Can you share a little bit more about that?
About Albert Einstein or about the
Mm-hmm.
talk? It's just one of those things where we look at somebody and go, they are clearly an expert in their discipline, whether they are teaching OSINT, doing a podcast, or somebody that came up with theories of relativity that are and other theories that explain our universe and the entire galaxy and everything. Many of us would go, that person is clearly a success, an expert, but to himself, Einstein didn't have those feelings. His perceptions of who he was a lot different than what other people thought of him. And for me, when I read that, I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I have, is because a lot of other people tell me, hey man, that was a great presentation, or I learned a lot, which was cool to hear, but I couldn't hear that. I'd be like, yeah, thanks very much. It was the great slides, or it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
me that they were talking about. I didn't make that talk. It was just the lighting in the room, whatever. They don't know what they're talking about. That idea that somebody that is so big in their career, big in the field, has so many achievements, could feel that they're not doing enough, or they are not they're not an expert enough, or somebody's going to find out that they
Mm-hmm.
don't know all the things that they don't know. Because I think one of the things that I found out was that the more you know about a field, the more you learn what you don't know. And
Mm-hmm.
the things that you don't know then start becoming a little crushing to you. They can be motivating. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about AI. I don't know about how to do these things in social media. And that can weigh down on me, or that can motivate me to learn more, to even grow my expertise more. And for Einstein, it was just like an aha moment that when I read that, I was like, wow, that sounds like it's hitting home.
Yeah. And it's interesting now the universe conversation is continuing, right? Because we're talking about how you interact with the universe, which it almost sounds a little bit like the universe is just this thing that's all around me and I don't really interact with it. Like it presents opportunities and I have the choice whether or not I want to take those opportunities or not. Is that right?
Sometimes the
Okay.
universe acts, and then I have to react. I'm losing my job, or
Right.
coming to that point where I'm like, this is not gonna, yeah, coming to certain personal decisions. Sometimes some things happen and you have to go left or you go right. And I'm a big proponent of trying things for X amount of days, weeks, months, years, and then reevaluating. That
Mm,
really helped me get through some of the analysis paralysis I had, where I just saw all these different directions, and some of them didn't, none of them looked like a good one. So I said, you know what? I'm going to try this path. I will set a date on my calendar for 6 months or 3 months or a week, and then I'll check back with myself and see if I need to adjust or take a different path. But that allowed me to at least try stuff, at least start down that path. So when the universe would act on me and go, this is happening, Micah, I could analyze, choose a course, and then check back in to see if that was the right choice or the good choice.
yeah, I think that's a really wonderful point that you just made because, like you were saying with the analysis paralysis by
Paralysis.
analysis, sorry,
Paralysis. Yeah.
paralysis by analysis, our inner imposter oftentimes. So, a lot of people don't know that the inner imposter is dictating their behaviors. So when I hear people say things like, I feel stuck, or I've done everything possible and I don't know where to go, or I don't know the right next step for work, a lot of times that is accompanied by a thought of, I have to get it right the first time. And so I love that tool of, you know what, I'm going to try XYZ for this predetermined period of time. And I'm going to give myself permission to do it. And when that time comes and goes, then I can reflect and decide, do I want to keep going? Do I want to pivot? And it sounds like you work under the assumption that that is not time wasted if you
Right.
do end up pivoting.
Yeah, I've learned to embrace that failure, right? So I look at failure as learning experience and that growth opportunities. So if I try a path and that didn't work out, at least I know that at this date, at this time, that was not the right, or this is not where I want to be. And I can make that career, that personal or whatever type of change. But it does allow me to make that first step. And I think that is so hard for many people is there's nowadays we have so many choices that it becomes overpowering if we make that first step and go, okay, I'm going to check back and see what happens where that next step should be, or 3 steps later where I should be. It gives us that forgiveness to allow us to make an error, to make it, to choose the wrong path, and to be forgiven.
Yeah. There's that grace that we were talking about in the beginning. So
Sneaks up on you.
yeah,
Sneaks up.
sneaks up on you. And that what you described is not perfectionism. It is the excellence. All right, beautiful. I hate to close this out, but core memories are a really big part of the process that I work with my clients. I have the theory that some of our memories that even when we look back, sometimes we might think that's a weird core memory. Why is that something that stands out for me? But in hindsight, you can figure out like, oh, actually, that was pointing to my life purpose and my future work. Do you have any memories like that you're open to sharing where now you can look and realize, oh, that thing, it makes perfect sense that that's a core memory now, considering what I do?
Yeah, I do. And it goes to that teacher in me, that I am a teacher thing. Back when my kids were little, but way before I started teaching cyber, or even I think before I was in cyber, I was in like just IT, information technology. When my kids were little, I started parenting them in a way that was not the way I wanted to. And luckily, very luckily, my wife found a set of parenting classes that we could attend. And it was one of those peer taught groups where you take the class and you take another couple of classes, and then you can get signed off to actually lead the course yourself. And I remember going through the classes and really like embracing this and feeling like this is really helping. And it was. And I remember when I became one of those peer leaders for that group and having a set of 20 parents around me and leading this group. And I remember it was a 10-week class, and right around week 4, it was really challenging for the parents because they were trying new things and things were not working. And then I knew as an instructor, as somebody who'd been through it, that like week 5, things started turning around. And I remember week 5 coming into this peer group and all of us sitting around in a circle, and one of the I would say, hey, what happened this week in your parenting lives? And somebody raised their hand and said, hey, my child went to bed and stayed in bed the entire night. And they've never done that before. And somebody else would raise their hand and say, my child got dressed by themselves. And then when they started doing that thing that really bugs me, I did that technique you told me about and it worked. And I was like, I'm getting through to these people. I was able to help them get better at parenting. And
Oh,
it made me feel, back then I was like, that feels good. And now I'm like, yeah, of course that feels good. And because that's who you are.
yes. Oh, I love that so much. So we thank you for sharing that because it does illustrate that we have our intuition is constantly sending us message. And here it was communicating like this is what you were meant to do,
Mhm.
right? Is connect with people through those teaching moments and build those communities, which you do so well in the work that you do now. And so for our last takeaway for our audience, If there's one thing that you can share with someone who's struggling with imposter syndrome right now, what is it that you would tell them?
So when I did my 2017 talk, sorry, I'm going to start crying now because I think about this and it really it's in me. The fact that you're not alone. There's lots of people. I think one stat I read was like 70% of the people that are out there in the world have some form of imposter feelings of inadequacy, and also just people deal with it differently. And so when you're feeling those imposter feelings really strongly, or you feel like you don't belong, and you feel these things are keeping you back, there are places you can go to get help, from podcasts like this to other resources that can help you become a higher functioning imposter.
Thank you so much for sharing that wisdom. I got goosebumps hearing you share because you're right. You're not alone. And that's what we're here to share is the lessons and the experiences. And so thank you for being so honest and sharing literally what your physical, mental, spiritual, all that experience is like, because I know someone needed to hear that. And Michael, where can people find you?
So I'm online under Web Breacher as my handle. And then I also have the Open Source Intelligence Training Academy, MyOSINT.training. And as you've already mentioned, the National Child Protection Task Force, the ncptf.org. I find missing and exploited children there. So I'm at those three places most all the time.
Yes, and he's a total badass. You guys, if you're looking for OSINT materials, training, connections, Micah is phenomenal, and I'm so grateful that we got to connect. And so we will have all those links in the show notes so people can connect with you. And if you're looking for more resources on imposter syndrome, check out my life purpose exercise freebie. It's on my website, www.mightysparrowcoaching.com. It even has video prompts to help guide you, or you can check out my best-selling book, The Least of Us, How Your Imposter Syndrome Points to Your Greatest Power, available at all major book retailers. So until next time, humble warriors, remember, the world needs who you were made to be. Thank you so much for joining us today on this journey to discover how you can harness your imposter syndrome to work for you. Have a good one. If you enjoyed this episode and would like some help overcoming your imposter syndrome, check out the free life purpose exercise on my website and subscribe to my blog. If you already know what your life purpose is and are ready to crush or harness your imposter syndrome, then you're going to love my best-selling book, The Least of Us, How Your Weakness Points to Your Greatest Power, available on Amazon and all major book retailers. Or you can hit me up at alani@mightysparrowcoaching.com to discuss private coaching or corporate and government training. That's ALANI@mightysparrowcoaching.com. Listen, there's only ever been one you, and there will only ever be one you. And you have a specific gift to give that the world desperately needs. Don't let your self-doubt be the thing preventing you from living your most joyful and impactful life. Until next time, I'm always cheering you on.